Tom Patton, running for Jacksonville City Council, Group 2 at large. As probably most of you know, I had about a 30-year career as a broadcaster and a journalist, and I spent about the last 8.5 of that career here in Jacksonville. And I sat across the table from 2 mayors, 8 city council presidents, 2 sheriffs, 3 superintendents of schools, more than a dozen members of the Duval legislative delegation, congressmen, senators, business leaders, community leaders, what have you. And I learned a lot about Jacksonville. I've kind of described it as getting a master's degree in Jacksonville. This process has become more like getting a PhD. Be that as it may, I found myself with an opportunity to, once the broadcasting opportunity kind of went by the wayside, to look around and see how could I get back involved and be back involved in the community that I have adopted as my home. I moved here almost 12 years ago and have decided this is where I'm going to make my stand. I'm going to stay here for the duration. So I wanted to find a way to get back involved in the process. I've always been the guy who enjoyed watching the sausage being made. I worked at C-SPAN for a while and rather enjoyed it. And I know a lot of people think that's about as dull as dust. But that's why I decided to run, because I started a lot of conversations at WJCT, and this gave me an opportunity to go in and finish some of those conversations. And I feel very, very confident that I have every opportunity to win this race. And that's probably a little bit more than 90 seconds. My internal clock may be off. I've been out of the game for a while.
That'll work. What are the core functions of local government?
Well, the core functions of local government are to provide for public safety and infrastructure, are the 2 main items. We've got to have police and fire. We've got to make sure people feel safe in the streets. We've got to make sure that if your house is on fire, that somebody's going to respond. If you have a heart attack or an automobile accident, that you've got first responders. So public safety is probably the first core function of government outside of creating a budget. I mean, obviously, we're constitutionally required to create and pass a budget. And providing for infrastructure, much the same thing. We need roads, we need drainage, we need sewers, we need all of those things that are necessary to have a operating city. Beyond that, pretty much everything is optional. It's you want to be able to take care of the disadvantaged and those who are less fortunate than we happen to be. You want to be able to have libraries and great buildings like this one where kids can come. You want to be able to make sure that you do have that you're able to prevent crime as opposed to be incarcerating. It is far less expensive to prevent a crime than it is to incarcerate somebody after the fact. But when it comes right down to the core functions, you've got to create a budget, and you've got to provide infrastructure.
Okay.
Yes. What specific savings do you believe can be found in the upcoming budgets? Please be specific regarding areas of programs, and on our mind, Jacksonville Journey, Jacksonville Economic Development Commission, Cultural Council, special events, and public safety, and any others that you could think of.
Well, there are probably savings to be found almost everywhere. I mean, I haven't made the kind of detailed study of the city budget that probably I should have at this point. But of those things that you mentioned, we have to be able to invest in this community. We have to be able to try to attract jobs and businesses to our community. I mean, the economic development is one of those things that the cities against which we are competing are doing those things. So the economic development piece is, in my mind, while it may not be a core function of government, it's an important function of government. I mentioned crime prevention as opposed to incarceration, and the Jacksonville Journey, I think probably is an important program. Now, could we find savings there? We probably could. Can I tell you chapter and verse what they are right now? No, I can't. But it certainly is one of those things that will bear looking at and oversight as we move forward. I mean, I remember when they first rolled out the Jacksonville Journey, and I was sitting in a studio, I was sitting in the newsroom, and They came out and the committee reported out and said, we need $33 million for this program. And everybody said, well, we don't have $33 million. No, there's no way we have $33 million. There's not 30, oh look, here's $33 million. I'd like to know where that came from. I'd like to know how they funded that. And yet, on its basis, the program has merit because it does cost less to prevent a crime than it does to incarcerate after the fact. I think almost any study that you look at will tell you that. And so when you consider what it is that we're getting back for that investment, and crime rates are down now, not enough, but I think that it pays dividends. And so I think economic development and crime prevention are important things. The Cultural Council, I worked with an organization that was a direct beneficiary of the Cultural Council. I think that when you look at what the dollars that get leveraged by the Cultural Council, the federal and state monies that get leveraged that come into this community by the small investment that's made by the city on the Cultural Council, there can be a case made for that. But I also don't think that anything can be taken off the table. I don't feel like any of those programs or any of those budget items are sacrosanct. I think there is certainly savings to be made in the pension funds. Pension reform is going to have to be something that we seriously consider and look at as far as what return are we getting on that investment. But you can't take anything off the table. And so to be, as you say, specific about what would I cut, I'm not there yet. And when I get there, I'll be able to look into those items and say, here's what it is that we have, and here's what it is that we need to do. I'd be in favor of zero-based budgeting for the city government, as opposed to having departments say, here's what we spent last year. We certainly need at least that much, and maybe more. I would be an advocate of having department heads build a budget from the ground up like everybody does in their business. On an annual basis, say, here's what we think we need to spend. As opposed to, I mean, I worked around the federal government long enough to know that every time about the 1st of September rolled around and people started spending money because if they didn't spend it, they wouldn't get it the next year, that's no way to run a budget. And so I would certainly be an advocate of trying to revise the budget process in some way, that we actually knew what it was that we needed as opposed to knew what it was that we spent the year before.
Okay. You kind of gave the introduction to it. What do you believe is the solution to the city employee pension problem, and what steps would you take as city council member, understanding the administration has to wheel and deal?
Right.
What do you see as the city council member can do toward moving toward that solution?
Well, the city council has to be able to present as much of a unified front as they can to let people know that pension reform is serious business. When it comes right down to it, if it comes to city council, if it goes to impasse and comes to city council, then we have to be able to make an informed decision as to where we want those pensions to be. Now, I'm not in favor of wholesale changes to what it is that we've already promised to people. I don't think that changing horses in the middle of the stream on that is probably a very advantageous thing to do. I think that if they came in expecting a certain thing, then they ought to be able to get at least most of that. Now that doesn't mean that benefits can't change. Social Security benefits change. I mean, obviously anybody with a 401k knows that if the market takes a tank, then your benefits are going to change. So again, nothing can come off the table, but going forward, the people who are coming in tomorrow and going into the next round of police and firefighters that we have, we're going to have to look at the defined contribution plan as opposed to the defined benefit plan. We're going to have to look at those folks who are members of the police and fire unions making contributions not only to their own retirement but to their health care as well, just like people do at the private sector. I keep hearing from, when I go out and talk to folks that are private sector leaders and say, you know, certainly my pension hasn't gone up, and I always make a contribution to what it is that I do, and there's a lot of anger out there towards the unions about their reluctance to make any changes in what it is that they feel like they're owed. So that's how I would approach that. And as a city council member, what we can do is make our views known and let the folks that are leading the police and fire unions know that if it does come to us in an impasse situation, that we're not going to be able to be bullied and told what we have to do. And I haven't been endorsed by the police or the fire unions, and so I'm at least not in fear of my campaign contributions to be able to say that. So.